A Panharmonicon for Eldrazi? It must be Modern Horizons 3 time. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose, a super early dose of Modern Horizons 3 spoilers. So, Modern Horizons 3 spoilers kick off officially on Tuesday, but this week, Wizards has been giving us a little taste, some early spoilers in their lore articles, and today we finally got a card that was so exciting I just had to talk about it. So we're going to catch up on all the early spoilers for this week, but before we jump into it, two quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk Modern Horizons 3. First up today, we got an incredibly sweet card, an Eldrazi-monicon in Echoes of Eternity. So Echoes of Eternity, it is a 6-mana colorless Eldrazi enchantment. It's literally an Eldrazi enchantment. It is Kindred, which was tribal until a couple of days ago. So it's 6 mana, including 3 honest-to-goodness colorless mana. So keep that in mind. You can't pay generic mana for those diamond mana symbols. And then it says, if a triggered ability of a colorless spell or permanent you control triggers, it triggers an additional time, but it's even better. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, you copy it and you can choose new targets for the copy. This card is so insane. It's essentially a colorless Panharmonicon, or a Panharmonicon, a souped up one for colorless things. That's also a double down for colorless things. You just get 2 copies of every colorless thing you cast. So assuming you can get this card on the battlefield, and that is a big if. It is 6 mana. You need a bunch of colorless mana. Honestly, I'm not sure how good this will be in a format like Modern. It's hard to get a actual Panharmonicon on the battlefield and survive to trigger it in Modern, let alone this 6 mana version. So that is a problem. Maybe it's more of a Commander thing than a Modern thing, but if you get this on the battlefield, you are going to pop off. So I saw some people wondering, why does it refer to doubling colorless spells? That's kind of weird, right? And the idea of this card is to make it the absolute perfect support card for Eldrazi. So doubling colorless spells makes it work with the cast triggers of Eldrazi like Emrakul and Kozilek and Null Drifter. And if you think about what this does, it's kind of ridiculous. So let's say you get down Echoes of Eternity and you cast an Emrakul the Eon's Torn. Its cast trigger is you get an extra turn, but you're actually going to get 2 extra turns, which probably just wins you the game. But it's even better than that. Once you're Eldrazi on the battlefield, it's going to double up your Annihilator triggers. So if you attack with that Emrakul, you're going to annihilate 12, which is probably just literally annihilate your opponent out of the game altogether. Like, no permanents left on the battlefield, flawless victory. And this works with any of these big colorless things. Like Kozilek's going to draw you 8 cards and annihilate for 8 when it attacks. Even Null Drifter, in some ways, it's best with non-legends. The only downside of like casting a Kozilek or an Emrakul is you don't really take advantage of the second mode of Echoes of Eternity because you're just going to legend roll. But if you cast a Null Drifter, you're going to get 2 copies of it. It is worth mentioning that because you get the token copy that is not actually cast, you're not going to double trigger that one's cast trigger, if that makes sense. I think I explained that really poorly. But let's say you cast a Null Drifter. Its cast triggers you draw 2 cards. You're going to get a second Null Drifter from the second ability of Echoes of Eternity, but that one's not going to draw you 2 cards because you didn't actually cast that one. It was just kind of created out of the air by Echoes of Eternity. So you'll double trigger the first one, you draw 4 cards. The second one doesn't do anything, but it still adds a body to the battlefield. And this card is arguably even better with some non-Eldrazi colorless creatures. Like, colorless creatures with ETBs are wild with this card. Think about Solemn Simulacrum. The most simple example. You get down your Echoes of Eternity, you play Solemn Simulacrum, you'll get 2 Solemn Simulacrums since you get to copy your colorless spell, and then once they enter the battlefield, they each will double trigger, so a single Solemn is going to get you 4 lands, and then when the 2 copies die, you're going to draw 4 cards. Mirror Battlesphere is absurd. You cast Mirror Battlesphere, it normally makes 4 1/1 mirror tokens, but you'll get 2 Mirror Battlespheres. Each of them will make 4 1/1 mirror tokens, but those abilities will be doubled, so a single Mirror Battlesphere, which is right on curve with Echoes of Eternity, is going to give you 16 1/1 mirror tokens and 2 Mirror Battlespheres, or like Precursor Golem. When you enter the battlefield, it makes 2 3/3 colorless golems, but you get 2 of them, they'll each make 2 golems. Those will also each be doubled up to 4, so a single precursor golem is going to make you 8 3/3 golems, plus you'll get 2 of the original precursor golems. So any colorless thing with ETB's triggers is going to be wild with this card. In Commander, it's kind of like this card is built to work with really any colorless commander or any Eldrazi commander, but it's going to be at its best, I think, in Voladuck, because Voladuck has an ability where when you cast a colorless spell mana value 7 greater, you get to cascade twice, but if you have Echoes of Eternity, you're going to cascade 4 times, and then remember, Cascade actually lets you cast the cards you cascade into, so if you cascade into colorless stuff, you get 2 copies of each of them, thanks to Echoes of Eternity, and then if any of those things have ETB triggers or cast triggers, you're going to double trigger those as well. Like, it's ridiculous the amount of value this card can offer. It's also worth mentioning, lands are colorless permanents, so there could be some value here. Like obviously Field of the Dead, it's a land that has a triggered ability, so instead of triggering it once when you play a land, you'll trigger it twice, make even more zombies. It works with like the janky Streets of New Capenna fetch lands. They have a triggered ability that sacrifices them and then you tutor out a basic, but you'll get to do that twice if you have Echoes of Eternity. But it's even better than that because it works with colored lands, because technically a Emiria the Sky Ruin or Dwarven Mine is colorless, even though it looks like a colored card, just because of the rules of Magic. So with Dwarven Mine, you make 2 tokens, Emiria reanimate 2 things, Crumbling Vestige is going to make double the mana, so there's probably some sweet land shenanigans there as well. I imagine that it's really easy to go infinite with this card in Carrot Clan Ironworks. I know we broke Carrot Clan Ironworks, it doesn't take a whole lot, but imagine like every time you cast an Ichor Wellspring, it's going to double up, so you get 2 of them, and then its triggers to draw a card is going to double up, so you're going to draw 4 cards. So for 2 mana, you get 2 Wellsprings, you draw 4 cards, you can sack those 2 Wellsprings to Ironworks to make 4 mana, so you're actually generating mana, and then out of the cards you draw, you find a Guild Globe, you cast that, you get 2 of them, you draw 4 cards, you sack it for mana. It seems like if you ever get Echoes of Eternity and Ironworks on the battlefield, you probably go infinite just by accident. As far as actually seeing competitive play, this is where I get stuck. Like, this is a card that if I can cast this in a colorless deck in Commander, I will do it every time. It's going to be amazing. But where does this fit in 60 card formats? That's where I'm not really sure. I'm honestly, as much as I love my Panharmonicons, a little skeptical that a 6 mana colorless Panharmonicon can really work in like modern or historic or timeless. The one place it does seem really cool is in like the historic Paradox Engine deck. We've seen some of these like colorless ramp combo decks using Forsaken Monument, Paradox Engine, maybe Aetherflux Reservoir to win. In something like that, Echoes of Eternity just pops off. Every mana rock you're casting, you're going to get 2 of. You're going to double trigger your Paradox Engine, make even more mana, which is ridiculous. And you're just going to like win the game on the spot. So that's one possibility. It's also super cute with Roaming Throne. I don't know where that fits in constructed formats, but doubling up your Roaming Throne, which also double triggers all your stuff, a single Solemn, I don't know, you're just going to ramp all the lands out of your deck. Maybe there's some sort of like Eldrazi-tron deck that could make it work, but here it's where I really worry about the cost of it. Like I said before, I can't manage to untap in Modern with a 4 mana OG Panharmonicon. It's really hard for me to imagine untapping with 6 mana colorless Panharmonicon, but maybe with the power of like Ugin's Labyrinth and Tron lands, maybe we can make it work where you just ramp into this and then you cast your Muldrifter and you draw an absurd amount of cards and get a big board in Muldrifters. You cast a Thought-Knot Seer, you double it up, you take all the cards out of your opponent's hand. They can't do anything. So I worry that at 6 mana, it might be too slow for competitive play, but this is one of those cards that if you get it down and untap with it, you probably just win the game the next turn. Maybe you don't literally get your opponent's life total to 0, but you're just going to have such a ridiculously huge turn, your opponent's not going to be able to get back in the game. So Echoes of Eternity, I do think this is one of those cards where you're going to hear people be like, oh, it's not really, you know, Modern Horizons, it's Commander Horizons, but I don't even care. Even if this card never sees a bit of play in Modern, and that's very possible, it's a 6 mana Panharmonicon effect, the card just leads to such big, splashy, flashy, epic turns. I absolutely love it. The card is super cool and I cannot wait to play with it. We also got a common that's worth mentioning in Basking Broodscale. So Basking Broodscale, 2 mana 2/2. It's a green creature, but technically it's colorless because devoid, very good wizards. You can pay 2 mana to adapt it to put a +1/+1 counter on it if it has no counters on it. Why are we talking about this random common? It's a last ability. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on Basking Broodscale, you can create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token that you can sack to add a mana. So this makes this card work a lot like Scurry Oak, and we've seen Scurry Scurry Oak actually be somewhat competitive all the way back to Modern is a combo piece. Like, Scurry Oak goes infinite with Rosicon of Cowslain. You have Rosicon, you have your Basking Broodscale, you put a counter on it, that's going to make an Eldrazi, which will trigger Rosicon to put a counter on Broodscale, which will make an Eldrazi, which will trigger Broodscale to make an Eldrazi, which will trigger Rosie, back and forth, back and forth. Not only does this give you an infinitely big Broodscale and an infinitely big board of 0/1 tokens, it's also going to give you infinite mana, because you can sack all those tokens for mana, which is really, really sweet. There's also an even easier combo in Blade of the Bloodchief. So Blade of the Bloodchief is a 1 mana to cast, 1 mana to equip it, and it says when a creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. If it's a vampire, it gets 2 counters instead. So with this combo, all we really need to do is get Blade of the Bloodchief on Basking Broodscale and then adapt it to start the loop, and what'll happen is we'll make the Eldrazi spawn, we can sack it to make a mana. When we sacrifice it, it's going to be a creature dying, which will trigger Blade of the Bloodchief to put a counter on Basking Broodscale, which will make a spawn, which we can sack to trigger Bloodchief, to trigger Broodscale, back and forth, infinite mana, infinitely big Broodscale, and this one's pretty frightening because it's a 1 mana equipment and a 2 mana creature. So this card, even though it's a random uncommon, you got to keep this one in mind, just because there's so much combo potential here. We also got one more rare to talk about in Devourer of Destiny. So Devourer of Destiny, it's an Eldrazi. It's a 7 mana colorless 6/6. It says you may reveal this card in your opening hand. If you do at the beginning of your first upkeep, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You put one of those cards on top, exile the rest, and then when you cast it, you get to exile target permanent that's 1 or more colors. So Devourer of Destiny, I've heard some people saying this is like Eldrazi once upon a time, and I don't know if I actually buy that. So yes, I can see what people are thinking. It's a card that for free gives you some card selection. The big difference I see here is Once Upon a Time is 2 mana to cast. So if you don't have it in your opening hand, you're still playing like kind of a fine rate for digging 5 cards deep, grabbing a creature or land. Devourer of Destiny is a 7 mana card. So if it's not in your opening hand and you're not getting that value out of it, which isn't the hugest amount of value anyway, it's kind of an actively bad card. That said, the more I think about this card, the more I wonder if there could be uses for it. We have seen in the past the Chancellor cycle pretty much all see play. Like, out of the 5 cards in the Chancellor cycle, 3 or 4 of them have seen competitive play. So it turns out that getting free value, even a little bit of free value, just for revealing a card in your opening hand, tends to be busted somewhere. So where could Devourer of Destiny work? And I think the obvious answer, and I really don't know if it's going to make it or not, but if it does, Tron is the most obvious answer. So Tron makes 7 mana once you assemble it. It's 7 mana, so you get to cast it. More importantly, if this is in your opening hand, you reveal it and you get to control the top 4 cards of your library to dig for your missing Tron piece. So this adds more consistency to making sure you have Tron on turn 3 every single game. The question's going to be, what do you cut from the deck? Like, this does kind of work like a Karn Liberated. You don't get all the upside of Karn, you know, ticking up to attack hand, ticking down, maybe restarting the game, but a lot of times Karn comes down, eats something with the -3, and then dies. In that scenario, Devourer of Destiny is kind of just better. It comes down, it exiles something, and you got a 6/6 body left behind. It's also really cute with Karn the Great Creator, which sees a lot of play in Tron, because Karn, usually you think about its -2 wish thing is tutoring from your sideboard, but remember, it can also grab cards from exile. So if you exile something with Devourer's ability, when you reveal it in your opening hand, you can always get that back later, assuming it's an artifact card with Karn. So that's kind of a cute synergy as well. So I think this card will probably be tried in Tron. Whether or not it actually sticks in Tron, that's what I'm not sure. Like, what do you cut from the Tron deck? Are you cutting Karn Liberated? Are you cutting some of the other big finishers for this 6/6? I'm not exactly sure, but I think people will at least try it in Tron. It's also really good with Ugin's Labyrinth, another 7 mana card that you can exile, helps you find your Ugin's Labyrinth, sets things up, and it does have some like jank combo potential. If you're playing a deck that actively cares about getting things in exile, like Slime Against Humanity, wants Slimes Against Humanity in exile to grow your future Slimes Against Humanity, or maybe like Eternal Scourge, Mist Hellogriff, and these combo pieces that you can cast from exile, maybe it can see play there as well. So Devourer of Destiny, my initial reaction was pretty like, meh, I don't think it's gonna be good enough outside of really fringe combos, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, yeah, I can see the merits of trying this in Modern Tron. I don't know if it's going to stick. I'm more of a Tron hater than a Tron player, but I do think it's good enough to try, and free value is free value, and it tends to be really, really good, so maybe it's going to be a little better than we think. We also got one more uncommon we got to dig into, because this card is generating a lot of conversation, and that card is Kozilek's Unsealing. So it's a 3-mana blue, well, technically colorless, because devoid, very good wizards, but a 3-mana blue devoid enchantment that says when you cast a creature spell with mana value 4, 5, or 6, you make 2/0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature tokens that you can sack to make a mana, and then when you cast a creature spell with mana value 7 or greater, you draw 3 cards. So this is a callback to Sarkhan's Unsealing, which I think is actually super cute. Sarkhan's Unsealing cares about the same things, but it deals damage. This is like the Eldrazi blue devoid version, so I like the callback to Sarkhan's Unsealing. The comparison I've seen, and this is another one, I don't know if I'm really buying it. Kind of like when we talked about the, revealing your hand Eldrazi comparing to Once Upon a Time. I don't know if I buy this one either, but Kozilek's Unsealing to up the beanstalk. People see this enchantment that sits on the battlefield and draws a lot of cards, and draws a comparison. There are some big differences here. Unsealing is 1 more mana. It does not draw when it enters the battlefield, which is part of what made up the beanstalk so good, is worst case, it's replacing itself immediately. But Kozilek's Unsealing, if you get it on the battlefield, in the right deck, it can be like a devastating combo piece. So the easiest way I think to use this card is build some deck with a bunch of affinity creatures, Mirror Enforcer, Sojourner's Companion, Thought Monitor. They happen to cost 7 mana, and then when you cast your Mirror Enforcer, you draw 3 cards. You're going to get hopefully more Mirror Enforcers or Sojourner's Companions, and then you cast that again, you draw some more cards. You cast that again, you draw some more cards. You just keep chaining through your deck, and then you get like a Frogmite. Frogmite is not going to draw you a ton of cards, but it's still fine because it's going to generate some extra mana, right? So you generate some extra mana with Eldrazi spawn tokens, which then lets you cast other stuff or turbo into your big affinity stuff if you don't have quite enough mana, and then eventually you might be able to just chain stuff together until you draw your entire deck and then win with a Thassa's Oracle or a Grape Shot or something. How good this plan is, I'm not really sure. It looks like kind of a interesting glass cannon combo that I'm excited to try because it seems like it's going to be super sweet when it pops off. It's like potentially a turn 3 draw my deck win the game combo, but it does seem like it's going to be really reliant on finding and sticking the Kozilek's Unsealing, or else the whole thing kind of falls apart. A more safe use of this is kind of using it like a backup Simulacrum Synthesizer. Since Synthesizer released in the big score, we've seen a resurgence of affinity in Modern thanks to its ability to just make a huge board of constructs, but I've played the Synthesizer deck quite a bit, and one thing I've noticed about it is when you have Synthesizer and it pops off, it feels busted, but when you don't have Synthesizer, you're kind of just like casting a bunch of not very good affinity threats. I wonder if Kozilek's Unsealing could actually be like the backup Simulacrum Synthesizer, because they kind of want the same things, these big affinity threats. So maybe this is like copies 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Synthesizer, where if you don't have Synthesizer, you play Unsealing, and you're able to draw a bunch of cards as you cast your big affinity stuff until you hit the Synthesizer and then win the game. I'm a little nervous that it's not an artifact itself. Usually affinity doesn't want to play non-artifact cards because it doesn't help lower their affinity costs, but maybe this one is just so pushed that it works. The other way jankier plan with this card, and this might be my favorite one, although I'm sure it's the worst of the bunch, is it seems really, really cool with a merge combo. A while ago we talked about Haragast, the new like give all your stuff a merge creature, where you can just like chain together a bunch of emerge things, just like colorless things, sack a colorless thing, sack a colorless thing, build this like massive weird board of triggers and death triggers. Kozilek's Unsealing seems absolutely perfect for this archetype. If you're trying to chain together Haragast into Elder Deep Fiend and Descended Mindbender, this is just going to generate a ridiculous amount of card advantage. That card advantage is going to allow you to keep emerging and keep chaining things together. So I'm very intrigued by the possibility of some sort of Haragast Kozilek's Unsealing combo deck. And in Commander, I think you can just jam this in any big creature deck. It's probably best in something like a Modi, which kind of forces you to play a ton of really expensive things to trigger your commander's ability. But if you're playing like Kinnan with a bunch of big stuff, or Coma, a bunch of big sea creatures, this just seems like a fine value effect. Like if your deck's full of relatively expensive creatures, the Eldrazi spawn, generate a bunch of mana, and eventually get to your big stuff and draw a ton of cards. And really, if you think about it, this is a 3-mana enchantment. How many times do you need to trigger this to actually make it worth its cost? The answer is probably 1. Like a 3-mana draw 3, that's already a fine card. So if you get this down and draw 3 once with it, you're already happy with it. And then you get the upside that maybe it sticks around and you draw 6, or you draw 9, or you draw 12. And when that happens, this 3-mana uncommon enchantment just like straight up wins you the game. So Kozilek's Unsealing, this is one that's worth keeping in mind. I'm not convinced it's quite up the beanstalk broken, because I don't think you can just jam it in generic decks as well as you can Beanstalk. Like Beanstalk, it turned out it was really easy to play with Leyline Binding and Evoke Elementals. Since this only works specifically with creatures, I think it's a narrower group of decks that this might go in, but in those decks, this has a look of an enchantment that can be a ridiculous combo engine that can just straight up win the game like the turn after it comes down. Finally today, we get a few other lower rarity cards. Nothing that I think is really going to see a bunch of modern play or anything, but Breaker of Creation can gain a lot of life. When you cast it, you gain a life for each colorless permanent you control. Since lands are colorless permanents, this can easily be gaining 10, 20 life in a commander deck, so it might have a home in like Eldrazi commander decks. And then I love like Wumpus Aberration. One of my favorite parts of this set so far is seeing iconic, and in this case, not so iconic, old creatures coming back in Eldrazi form. So I'm very curious, if you could take one creature and turn it into an Eldrazi and have it release in this set, what would you pick? We've seen Eldrifter, we've seen the Spawn Gang Commander, whatever the Siege Gang Commander thing is. We see Wumpus Aberration. Give me your pick for the creature you want to see Eldrazified most. Anyway, everyone, that brings us to the end of our daily Modern Horizons 3 spoilers for today. So we'll be back on Tuesday when spoiler season kicks off in full, talking about all the sweet new cards. Until then, everyone, have an amazing weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? Well, check out this week's Against the Odds, where we plotted our way to a turn 3 Ulamog, or maybe the one where we talked about the worst creatures in the history of the game.